All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here around 2024 preview and prediction for the Syracuse Orange. Looking at this new staff following the dismissal of Dino Babers. Fran Brown spent the past 2 seasons as the Georgia defensive back coach. Mike Johnson, Jeff Nixon as the offensive coordinators. Mike was actually on staff here a season ago. Elijah Robinson and Robert Wright as the DCs. Biggest headline here is there's some pretty good momentum on the recruiting trail and in the portal, with some pretty impressive ads are already under this new staff. We start with the offense, a unit that was always kind of middle of the pack, but at times excites you. Mostly over the past couple of years, it's all about running the football. And this is something they did a couple of seasons with Sean Tucker. Last year, obviously, they had adequate balance from their quarterback and the running back position. But now it's going to be a complete turnover. Now, as Babers never really opened up the passing game. That's certainly going to change this season. As they went out and added Kyle McCord, a guy who was pretty much ran out of town in Columbus. Had a good season though. A strong arm player, accurate, a leader, good under pressure. He certainly improved in that area a good bit. Can really rip balls in the tight windows though. Isn't very mobile. Seemed to lack confidence to throw it downfield though. Never seemed to be that field general that you needed to be at Ohio State. But that doesn't mean he was awful, Nick. I mean, this is a guy that was still a couple of plays potentially away from making the playoffs, and that's something that would have obviously been big for his stature. Doesn't work out like that. Now he ends up here at Syracuse, a guy, a player that also wasn't really highly coveted in the transfer portal, but you think it's a complete steal for the Orange.
I think it's a complete steal. This is a guy that I think has immense talent and a lot of opportunity to continue to develop as a quarterback. Originally a product out of New Jersey, went to Ohio State and sat on the bench for 2 years before finally getting the starting opportunity last year. And I think he had a really good season despite them not reaching the heights that Ohio State hoped to. He was kind of the scapegoat when it all ended. Yes, he threw the pick on the final drive against Michigan, but people forget he was getting hit as he released that ball. If he doesn't get hit there, potentially, you and I were talking about this earlier, maybe that ball gets completed. They were marching down the field. He also took them down the field against Notre Dame. I know they got a little bit lucky on that drive, but still took him down the field to end up scoring the game-winning touchdown. So he had some experience being cool and calm in those high-pressure situations. I think he got an unfair shake last year. He had 3,100 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, and only 6 interceptions. Looked good in the pocket at 6'3", 220. I like the size, like the arm strength as well. A guy that's been around college football for a couple of years now, a veteran of the sport. I think you plug him in, and this works out great. I like what the new staff has done at Syracuse. I think Fran Brown has developed himself a really good staff, and he went out and got a really strong quarterback, a guy that was, potentially considered as a Heisman winner last year at Ohio State with the weapons he had. Certainly a decrease in weapons around him, but I still think Syracuse enough on offense to be really strong this year and get a lot of those points per game, yards per game, and other important statistics up this season.
Yeah, McCord, certainly a guy that should have been in the running for the Heisman. One of 8 returning starters is LeQuint Allen in the backfield. A guy with some nice elusiveness, good burst, can get skinny when running between the tackles. Proved to be a valuable pass catcher as well. Depth is very limited, though. Behind him is both backups are true freshmen in Jaden Hart and Yazin Willis. They did pick up Will Nixon, though, who has 3 years under his belt. It was very scarce, though, in terms of touches in this couple of years at Washington. One of the youngest all-around backfields in FBS, but when you talk about a supporting cast, because it's not just McCord here, Nick, we're going to continue to lift off some names, too, that could certainly elevate, their stock here at Syracuse in this new offense. And LeQuint Allen is one of them, a legit running back who had over 1,000 yards a season ago and 10 touchdowns.
Quinn Allen is certainly a legit running back, 1,064 yards rushing, 4.3 yards per carry, and 9 scores last year, as well as 38 receptions out of the backfield, which is the most on the team last year. 210 total yards for him, 5.1 yards for grab, and 1 score. I don't know how often he'll be used as a passing game weapon, but he still has that versatility in his game, which I think is very important for this offense. The backfield behind him, a little bit weak, obviously. Quiet depth that you listed there, but I do think there are some decent enough pieces. I think Will Nixon could be okay from Washington, an ad that's not terrible. Jaden Hart and Yashin Willis, we haven't seen enough of them, but they're 2 young players that are hoping to get on the field and get some stuff done. I think this is a backfield that's, yes, a little bit young, certainly, but I think LeQuint Allen's a really good, nice back to have supporting you back there.
Now you look at the wide receiver room. Trevor Pena, 6'1", 190, should be a starter this year after getting hurt in week 1. Caught 22 passes back in 22, but has mainly been a special teams player. Jackson Meeks comes over from Georgia, barely seeing the field in his 3 years for the Dogs. Zeed Haynes, a 4-star in last year's class, also transfers in from Athens. Umari Hatcher, he's the team's top leading pass catcher. Really impressive as an outside wide receiver for them. Donovan Brown also had 47 targets from the slot, while Darren Gill only had 12. So some guys that are coming back mixed in with some new players. Obviously, Damian Alford getting dismissed wasn't great. I thought he was a very good player. And of course, they get back a player in Aronde Gadsden at tight end who was incredibly forgotten, Nick. A big body pass catcher, strong hands, a 6', 216, a large catch radius, great body control, and has that versatility. Certainly needs to boost his route tree. and overall running, but can win in the slot with ease. I mean, this is a guy that was, had 7 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown through, a game and a few plays before he got hurt in week 2. A guy that immensely emerged back in 22, Nick, with almost 1,000 yards. This is one of the better tight ends in the country. I think he's going to remind people that now, is he was producing with not very good quarterback play.
Gadsden was certainly a forgotten player after his untimely injury last year. Very talented player, like you rattled off. He was having a really good start to the season after having 7 grabs through about a game and a quarter early on last year. Expect him to get a lot of targets early on, get comfortable. I like what he can do at tight end. More of a prototypical tight end, a solid player. Damian Alford getting dismissed, was definitely disappointing for this program, as he was their top pass catcher in terms of receiving yards last year. But Hatcher was not far behind him with 482 yards, receiving 15.1 yards per grab and 3 scores. Donovan Brown had 321, 11.9 yards per grab and 1 score for him, while Darnell Gill had a touchdown reception last year and a couple other catches he hopes to return. He was a true freshman last year, got some playing time with the X. Jackson Meeks and Zeed Haynes are 2 solid adds, in my opinion. Meeks especially, I think he's a guy that you could see something, develop out of him, be a good player for this offense. He's going to slot in there at that wide receiver X position, like to be a little versatile. This is not a terrible wide receiver room. It's not a phenomenal one either. A very middle of the road unit, but I think it's a good enough unit to get this team over the line right now.
And they look at the offensive line. They returned 4 starters up front. Enrique Cruz struggled a good bit at left tackle. Didn't end up allowing a sack, though. Jacob Bradford played a good bit at both guard spots, but wasn't very good. Will likely be the left guard, though. Jay Orrin Reed was good in pass pro at center, but struggled for the most part as a run blocker. Mark Petrie was the starting right tackle. Appears to be moving inside to make room for Demetrius Witherspoon at 6'5", 337. It was very good for Howard. He's also going to compete in at right tackle with a very good player in Savion Washington, who has started 2 seasons at right tackle at 6'8", 320. Good guy with length. He's a finisher that can really latch on and drive. Also, some veterans in terms of backups. Joe Cruz saw 300 snaps. Josh Oloa, a 334-pound center, has 400 snaps over 4 years. He's been very poor, but at least he saw the field. They also added a redshirt freshman from Georgia and Joshua Miller. Lots of different options, lots of experience, below-average O-line. One that can really march forward this season. I certainly think it will, Nick, and I love what they have at right tackle, but this will be an interesting battle between Witherspoon and Washington. 2 guys with good upside and a lot of size.
Witherspoon's a really nice add from Howard. I think he can really be a good player. The size in him is phenomenal at right tackle. I really think he can be solid. Mark Petrie as well is really good. I think Reed at center is a really solid player. Jacob Bradford and Enrique Cruz are not bad on the left side. I like how they returned 4 starters here. Some nice continuity, plus plugging in a really strong right tackle in Witherspoon potentially, or Savion Washington, who's not a bad player either, plugging him in there. I like what this offensive line can do here. I think this is a very strong unit. I think it starts in the trenches for this offense, and having a really nice offensive line here that's a good group that's looking to take a step forward is a really solid start.
Looking at the offensive verdict, the Q's offense is an exciting one with the addition of McCord mixed in with some good players in the supporting cast. Mixed in with that offensive line, they should take good steps in the right direction. QB play has always been quite poor for this school, and McCord should contend to break most passing records this season. This unit should eclipse 30 a game, significantly up from the 23.5 this past season. I do want to clarify the QB play, I guess, hasn't been awful. They've been able to produce on the ground, but in terms of throwing it through the air, it hasn't really been there. It's never really been evident over the last couple of seasons. What do you think the verdict and expectation is for this offense, Nick? 30 games, what I'm going to peg it as. Do you think they're going to hit that, or do you think they'll be below it?
I think they get the 30 points per game. They're at 23.5 last year, which was 92nd in the nation. I think Garrett Trader was a good quarterback for this team, but he also battled through some injuries at times. They had different players stepping in there. They really struggle with that consistency on offense. I think McCord brings that consistency. I like what he has really to offer here. I think he really got a fair shake being rushed out of Columbus. I think he can be a really stable, strong quarterback. I think they have to find a way to balance the running, the passing game. They previously were really good at that. I'm not entirely sure what the playbook's going to look like this year, but I think they can certainly get to 30 points per game and push up that yards per game number as well.
When you look at the defensive side of the ball, they returned 5 starters, lose 17 guys in the portal, added 8. Look at the defensive line. They have a really good player here in Fadil Diggs from Texas A&M. 7 sacks over the last 2 years. Had a staggering 11 TFL last season alone, though. Dennis Jacquez saw nearly 200 snaps. Was quite poor versus the run. Isaiah Hastings arrives from Alabama, not playing much really at all of his time with the Tide. Chase Simmons has been uneventful in his career thus far through 2 years. Look at the interior. Deion Wilson, the 6'5", 300. He's been a bit underwhelming in his near 900 career snaps before arriving at Syracuse. Elijah Fuentes, pretty sturdy in his limited appearances. Kevin Jabody was much better in double the snaps. He's only 6'4", 263, but appears to be one of their best defensive linemen. Brandon Ingram wasn't all that bad in 300-plus snaps of his own at 301 pounds. Not a bad defensive line they've put together here. They need some better presence off the edge. Diggs, one of those guys that probably could have went anywhere. Fran Brown goes out and gets him. I think that's going to pay dividends playing for this football team. They had 29 sacks last year, Nick. Wasn't bad, but in terms of projecting for the future, it's not all that bright, but that Aggie addition's really going to help them out. I think he's going to have a big year.
I think Diggs was a fantastic add on that left side, a really good physical player coming off the edge who can really add a whole lot in terms of tackles for loss and total tackles. I think he's a really strong player that they add. I think when you look at the rest of this unit, there are some solid pieces. Kevin Jobity, 31 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Decent numbers from him early on. He looked good in rotational piece on the left side. Dennis Jaquez Jr. as well. 11 total tackles, 1.5 each in terms of tackle for loss and sacks. Decent numbers there for him. Rashad Perry got some appearances last year. Didn't do a whole lot with that time, but he's a guy that could step up. Elijah Fuentes, 5 total tackles for him in limited snaps. He's a guy that I think could potentially step up as well in rotational. Braylon Ingram as well, further down the depth chart at 16 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 0.5 sack in his appearances. So some nice depth. They added Dion Wilson as well, who I think was a really good add. I think this is a defensive line that's not a bad unit. They made some nice adds with Diggs and Wilson. I think this is a unit that has some nice potential to step up and be strong here.
You look at the middle of this defense. Derek McDonald played some D-line, mainly a linebacker, though. Was pretty poor versus the run, and overall inconsistent player for most of the season. They picked up a player in James Hurd, didn't play last year for West Virginia. Anwar Sparrow was pretty respectable in his appearances as well. Caden Bailey played in 4 games last year. I think the biggest player they have here, though, is Marl Wax. He was the pure opposite of all these guys. He's just been a splendid performer in the middle for a couple of seasons now. Great at creating negative plays versus the run. It's unfortunate they lose Leon Lowry and Stephon Thompson. The last couple of seasons, Syracuse has had a pretty good linebacking room. That's one thing Dino Babers had. Michael Jones for a couple of seasons was highly impressive, and the other guys I just rattled off were right behind him, and they certainly filled those shoes with ease. So linebacker was always a strong suit for Babers. That's gone now. Fran Brown has to be able to keep these guys in sync. Losing 2 starters in the portal, not ideal, but Max remains, Nick, and this guy was a heavy producer for them with 110 tackles.
Marl Wax was stat sheet stuffer, a really strong player leading this team in tackles, 110 total tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, a pick, 2 pass breakups, and 4 forced fumbles. Really good numbers across the board, great stats from him. Derek McDonald, not a great tackler, but he was third on the team with 67 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and a pass breakup for him. I want to see him step up this year as they play him on sort of a little more out wide. They have a little bit depth down the depth chart, added some pieces here and there. It's a linebacking unit that's been really good, like you said, over the past couple of seasons. Sparrow didn't play a whole lot last year, but he could potentially be involved this year. I think this is a unit that's not bad. They return enough pieces, in my opinion, to be a very strong part of this defense.
Moving to the secondary, a pass defense that was 79th nationally last season, not awful by any means. Jaden Bellamy was quite sound in coverage as a redshirt freshman. Should really mold into a quality asset. Greg Delane was pretty good in his 9 games. Devin Grant was pretty good in coverage for Buffalo last season, only gave it up 106 yards. Transfers in the battle with true freshman Marcellus Barnes for a starting role. Justin Barron was tremendous in the slot, 90 tackles with strong coverage. They get back Deuce Chestnut, was very good for 2 years before leaving for LSU last season. Didn't play really at all. He transfers back in. Was good at outside corner as well. Appears to be shifting to safety this season, though. Elijah Clark was impressive himself at the other safety spot, showcasing nice versatility. Pretty high upside secondary here that I'm a fan of, Nick. There's numerous players I just rattled off that are good. And, a lot of them being veterans as well. I think they certainly got to figure out that one cornerback spot because it's not ideal to have a true freshman starting. But I think he'll be just fine if he does because the other guys around here are pretty stout. What do you make of this secondary? Obviously, Fran Brown's specialty.
I like this unit a lot. I think this is a very underrated unit in this conference. Justin Barron, 90 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, a pick, 7 pass breakups, a really nice coverage asset. Elijah Clark as well. 66 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups for him. Jaden Bellamy had 29 total tackles, a pick, and a pass breakup. A pick 6 also as well that he returned. Jaden Gold as well was solid for this team. He also had a pick, a pass breakup, 19 total tackles. Greg Delane looked good in his rotational appearances with 13 total tackles and a pick, while Chase Simmons, further down the depth chart, had 10 total tackles. They returned Deuce Chestnut, who's a really solid piece to get back in the fold here. I think Chestnut was a really good player at this program. Didn't get a whole lot of love at LSU, but he comes back here. They're going to move him around, probably play him at safety. I think he'll be really solid for this team. I like this secondary a lot. This secondary unit is not a bad unit at all. They were top 80 unit last year. I think they can certainly improve and get better this year. I like what they have here.
Looking at the verdict for this defense, the Qs was middle of the pack last year, and they should move forward once again. Really like that secondary. They have a highly impressive player in the middle, and a D-line that has some good experience, and they also get a nice addition for their pass rush. Up front, though, overall, is a tad concerning. I don't see them getting brutalized versus the run, which only happened a few times during last year. So I think this defense, again, will be kind of a middle-of-the-pack unit. How do you see it playing out, Nick? A team that has never been awful on defense. You do lose that guru of sort, I guess, with Babers, who's really an offensive coach, too. But I thought he did a great job with this defense. They were never awful.
This was a very solid defense, middle of the pack defense that had a good hard-hitting secondary. I think Fran Brown is a really great coach in the secondary, so he will find a way to continue to get the best out of those players. The defense, I think, will get better this year. I do think they have a solid linebacking core that, a bit weak at times, but I do think they have enough good pieces with Waxley in the way. I think the secondary is really solid. Bringing back Chestnut was a good add for this team. The front part of this defense, I worry about the defensive line, but adding Diggs out of the portal could really help this unit. I think this will be a strong unit in the conference.
Now you look at the final prediction. Syracuse has lots of momentum on their side with the hiring of Brown, highly impressive portal additions, and players like McCord and Diggs. Offense will have good balance as the O-line will improve, while again, a D that was middle of the pack last year will make some strides of their own. Pretty soft schedule should lead to this team hitting the postseason with ease. 7.5 is the over-under win total. I'm going to go ahead and take that and throw some bucks on it, just for the culture, Nick, because this is always a fun team to root for. The schedule really is incredibly soft. I mean, they should certainly, find themselves starting the season undefeated, and if they don't, they'll probably maybe lose a game to Georgia Tech. At UNLV might be tricky. They shouldn't lose any of those games, though. I think they should win all of those. And then down the stretch, a little bit tougher of games, but overall, 8 wins minimum for this ball club, and you even have them reaching double figures with 10.
I have this team at 10 wins. 2018, this team also got 10 wins. They had 2 close conference losses at Clemson, at Pitt, before getting blown out to Notre Dame, who was a really good team that year, in a neutral site at Yankee Stadium. I think this team will be very good again this year. I think the schedule is not bad at all. I mean, non-conference is very light. That game at UNLV is certainly interesting, a tough trip out west, but outside of that, not too difficult. I think they'll pick off Boston College and Miami. I still believe they're going to lose to Tech and NC State. I'm buying into the hype here. I've done it before. I bought into the hype on programs that bring in a lot of different players and coaches, but I like what Syracuse has here. I think Fran Brown's inexperienced, but I think he's a guy that brings a lot of high energy and was a really good secondaries coach for Georgia. Has really hit the ground running, recruiting hard. I think McCord got a bad shake up there in Columbus. I still think he's a really incredibly talented quarterback. As long as he can keep his focus and doesn't let those, the comments and what happened last year get to him, I still think he's a phenomenal quarterback that has all the room in the world to grow. The wide receiving room plus tight ends are not terrible. The Quinn Allen's a really good back to have behind you, helping you out. The defense has some solid pieces, a nice little core of players, a good secondary, decent linebacking core, and some nice adds. The defensive line makes that a little bit stronger, plus a rock-solid offensive line. All the signs point to me for Syracuse having a really good season and being extremely competitive in this ACC. I like what they're building in upstate New York.
Yeah, I think this is a team that's going to be very exciting this season. Love to see that momentum continue in the year McCord will have. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And it does kind of suck that the only opportunity really to pull an upset that might shock college football will be against Miami. Probably Virginia Tech as well. Both of those teams we picked to do fairly well. So there'll be opportunities for them to impress. No exact elite opponents on tap right now, though. So this should be a great building year for Syracuse. Some lofty expectations from us both. I think they can certainly accomplish them, though. That's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. Always fun to break down the Orange, especially in this new era.
Super excited to see what this team can do this year. Even if they don't reach that 8 or 10 win mark that you and I have them at, I think they can still find a way to be very successful this year, get to a bowl game, and continue to build off that success. I think there's a lot of good things coming in upstate New York for Syracuse.
That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.